All right, everybody. This is the way I'll be lecturing through the semester. Since we only meet one day a week and the lecture is considered online, I will be presenting these lectures in short little snippets around the different sections that we're going to cover in the book. When I lecture this way, you can see I will always tell you what section we're in, and I will give you the title of that subsection, so you can see this is the characteristics of life. This is the very first section of your book. And then I will tell you what we're going to go over. And the characteristics of life are going to be covered in figures 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, and 1.5. This book defines life, living things, as having 6 basic characteristics. So remember, biology, this is the study of life. So if you want to study life, you first have to define what is living and what is non-living. We will also discuss a few things that are non-living. Biology will cover a few non-living things like viruses, but we'll come back to that. So section 1.1, the characteristics of life. The first one that's in there, this one doesn't get a subheader, but it is a characteristic of life, and that is life is organized. And what we mean by that is there's a hierarchy from the smallest things to the biggest things. And the smallest things that are in living things are called atoms. Matter of fact, these are the smallest things in anything we call matter. So these are the smallest units of matter. Life is organized. So if we put a bunch of atoms together, we'll then get molecules. So molecules are a collection of atoms. If we put a bunch of molecules together, we're going to get what are called organelles. We've already talked about all the various organelles that are in a cell. So that lysosome, that peroxisome, that endoplasmic reticulum, the ribosomes, the nucleus. These are the organelles. They are going to be a collection of molecules. And then next in our level of organization is what we started off with last week, and that is the cell. And a cell is considered the smallest unit of life. So atoms are in cells, but they're not considered living. Neither are molecules, neither are organelles. Once we get to the cellular level of organization, we are now talking about living things. This is where 110 is going to take us. We're going to go into depth in these levels of organization. When you take microbiology and anatomy and physiology, you're then going to build to the next levels of organization. Cells are built into tissues. Tissues are then built into organs. Organs are then built into organ systems. And finally, organ systems will create an organism. So we started with the smallest units and we built it to a singular organism. So each of these will get collectively larger as we build them together. Now we don't live in our organization to just those things that are to the organism. We don't study this in detail in 110, but if you were to go on to take some other classes in biology, like botany or fungi classes, or an animal class, or ecology, you will then be able to build even further. After organisms, so I think we left off at G, can't quite remember, but organisms can then be put together into what are called species. You are part of a species. You are the species human, Homo sapien. You are a collection, we are a collection of similar organisms. Species can then be built into communities. And communities are all the living things. in an area. So even if you were to just take the city of Pittsburgh, we could talk about the community of living things in Pittsburgh, all of the plants, all of the fungi, all of the protists, all of the animals, all of the bacteria. These are all considered living things. Communities are the next level, Hij, and we build then into what are called ecosystems. Ecosystems are all the living, i.e. the communities, and non-living things. This would be the air, the water, and the land. Soil isn't living. Air is not living. Water is not living, but it is part of our ecosystem. We need these things to live. And then our last level is what's called the biosphere. And the biosphere is going to be the collection of all the ecosystems on the planet. And for right now, basically we only know of one place that there are living things. So the only biosphere we know is our planet. This is also very well illustrated in figure 1.2. So that is the first characteristic of living things. There are 6, as I said. So the other 5 are also the subsections of section 1.1. So after you read about the organization of life in the very beginning of section 1.1, you'll then see that the next subsection is living things require materials and energy. Materials essentially means you need stuff to live. You need things like O2 from the air. You need water. You need food and nutrients. These are materials. In addition to that, you need energy. And we'll talk about energy a lot this semester. Energy is what allows you to process this. So this is going to allow you to process and use those materials. Because as we all know, it's not enough to just put food into your mouth or to drink water. You need to turn them into other things that will then become building blocks of you. So you, any living thing, will be able to acquire materials and energy. If you turn the page now, you'll see that the next subsection says organisms maintain an internal environment. There's a very important word in this section. This is the word homeostasis. And homeostasis means that you have a very stable internal environment. Homo is a root word meaning the same. So this means you're going to have the same stasis, the same environment. You want to have a very stable environment. Matter of fact, for all of you going into healthcare, this is your primary goal as a healthcare attendant. You want to make sure that your patients leave in homeostasis. This is what it means to be healthy. If you're running a fever or you're too cold, you're either going to be out of balance one way or the other. You want to make sure that you have a stable temperature. So, from there, we can move on to the next one, and that is organisms respond to stimuli. This means that we react to our environment. You'll often get up in the morning because the sun comes out. Stimulus is the sun, and you've responded to it by getting up. As the sun goes down, you often get sleepy. You're responding to a light stimulus. Over the summer, like right now, I'm very much responding to the heat. I don't really care for the heat. So I try to find places that will allow me to be cool. So the stimulus is heat. My response is to try to move and find a cooler place to be. And then next, on the next page, you see organisms reproduce and develop. To reproduce means that we have offspring, or in the case of humans, what we call children. We have to do this in order to regenerate and keep our species going. To develop means that we're going to start off as a single-celled organism called a zygote. We will be able to undergo mitosis until we become an adult. Then these adults will create offspring. Those offsprings will start off as a single-cell zygote. They'll undergo mitosis, become adults again, and we will be able to keep this cycle going. And then lastly, organisms adapt. So it turns out that I've got too much moisture on my thing, so organisms adapt to the environment. This is not something that's done at an individual's space. To be able to adapt, oops, and I spelled it wrong, this should be a D. To be able to adapt means that over time, species will change in response to their environment. This is going to be something to see how well we adapt to things like climate change, how we adapt to the COVID response. An adaptation can be either natural or synthetic. And by synthetic, I mean, for instance, if we are able to develop a vaccine for COVID, that will be a synthetic. It's not something that has changed within the genes of us, but it's something that we've done and modified our environment so that we can live in it. So these are the 6 characteristics of life. You can read a little bit more about them in the book, but I've given you the general gist. The one that's most important, you notice I took the most time on, is life is organized. Make sure you understand the smallest pieces of living things all the way up to the largest things. So that will conclude the first virtual lecture.